Hi everyone. Yep, I'm wearing a suit today. I had the suit on for a different reason. I came home and I was going to dress down to record this lecture, and then my wife said, wait a second, why don't you just wear the suit for your lecture? And I thought to myself, yeah, that's actually a good idea, so I thought I would. Yeah, I try to be a role model to you, but as you'll notice, my hair is below my collar. That's typically not appropriate, but it is COVID-19 in the summer of COVID, so I'm still refraining from going to the hairstylist, if you will, and getting that chopped up. But a lot of the companies that recruit from the ISM program tend to be a little conservative, and the rule of thumb is if your hair gets below the collar, you need to start using your better judgment. But at the same time, since my day, in college and after college and being in the workforce, things have really lightened up and become more informal. In fact, I almost forgot how to tie a necktie this morning because I do it so infrequently. So I think those are good things. I think we all need to lighten up a little bit while still being professional. Okay? All right. So today what I want to talk about is there's a leading economic indicator, something that comes out every month that our government is obsessed with because it tells us so much about what's going on with the U.S. economy, and almost no one out there knows what it is. And when they announce it every month, people have no idea what it is, what it means, and how to interpret it. You need to know what it is because it's directly related to what you're majoring in. The economic indicator that I'm referencing is put together by the Institute of Supply Management. Okay, that national organization that makes up supply chain professionals, that has local chapters in Michigan and is a national organization headquartered in Arizona. When you graduate, you want to make sure that you join these clubs that are related to your field and your discipline, so you can stay on top of what's going on in your field, and so that you can network with professionals in your field. So monthly they'll have, for example, local chapter meetings. Nationally and annually they'll have conferences in different parts of the country. And these organizations also do things like externally validate your supply chain expertise by offering certification. So the Institute of Supply Management is one of the big ones, and they are partially funded by the government to calculate this thing called the ISM Manufacturing Index. Okay, it's sometimes called the PMI, the Purchasing Managers Index. Okay, so does the ISM Manufacturing Index or the Purchasing Managers Index sound a little bit related to what you're majoring in, given that you're ISM students and you're going to become supply chain management professionals? So yeah, you need to know what this is. You're majoring in this, and again, our government's obsessed with this, and people in the real world, major important decision makers, look at this on a monthly basis and try to figure out what's going to happen in the economy, and then they plan accordingly based on what this calculation says. So in previous lectures, I mentioned that the three most important things that our government calculates is GDP, unemployment, and inflation. Then I would argue that maybe the fourth most important thing that they look at on a monthly basis is probably this thing called the ISM Manufacturing Index, or the PMI. Okay? Having said that, don't forget, GDP is calculated every quarter, and it's basically adding up all economic activity without double counting anything to make sure that we know how big our economy is and if it's growing. So the reason we calculate GDP is basically to make sure that our economy is getting bigger and bigger and bigger from one day to from 1 month and from 1 year to the next. We want it to keep growing, right? Because that creates jobs. So they calculate GDP, and they usually do that every quarter. Then they also calculate unemployment every month, where they basically call up 50,000 people a month. It's a random sample, and they ask, do you have a job? And if you don't, why don't you have a job? So they want to make sure that our economy grows 2, 3, 4, 5% a year, so that it creates enough jobs to keep unemployment really low, like 3 to 5%. The final thing that they calculate is inflation, to make sure that our standard of living and quality of life doesn't deteriorate. In other words, things cost more. So that's called the Consumer's Price Index, the CPI. They go to a grocery store every month and they keep buying the same thing over and over again to see if it costs more or not. So they want GDP to grow 2, 3, 4, 5% a year. They want unemployment to stay 3 to 5% a year, and they would like to see annual inflation to be between 0 and 3%. And routinely, what's happened in the U.S. economy over a 10, 20, 30-year stretch is we'll grow our economy 2, 3, 4% a year. routinely unemployment will stay 3 to 5% because that growth is a job creation machine. And then inflation stays in check because of the productivity of our workforce and specifically what you're majoring in, doing things better, faster, and cheaper. And inflation tends to be like 1 to 2% annually in the United States. Okay, so they also calculate this thing called the ISM Manufacturing Index, or the PMI. And this is done by the Institute of Supply Management. And they basically survey several hundred purchasing managers on a monthly basis across several manufacturing industries, basically companies that build stuff. I want to say they survey over 300 people on a monthly basis across 18 different types of manufacturing industry. Okay, and I'm going to keep this really simple. Okay, when the ISM Manufacturing Index, or PMI, comes out, if it's above 50, very simple, that's good news. The ISM Manufacturing Index, if it's above 50, that's good news because that simply means that manufacturing output for that month expanded compared to the previous month. Okay, so if you hear about the ISM Manufacturing Index being 50 point something, or 52 or 53, above 50, that simply means for that month, American manufacturing cranked out more stuff than the previous month. Okay, if it's under 50, that simply means that American manufacturing cranked out less stuff than the previous month. It contracted. Now, this is the goal for the U.S. economy. This is why the government's obsessed with this calculation. They want to see the ISM Manufacturing Index, or the PMI, they want to see that to be above 50 every month. Why? Because that means every month American manufacturing is cranking out more and more and more stuff. Why is that important? Because if American manufacturing cranks out more and more stuff from one month to the next, at some point, American manufacturing has to hire more people because you're cranking out more and more stuff. Okay? Here's the problem. American manufacturing, while it's bigger than ever, while it's strong and dominant, and while America makes 20% of the world's stuff, and while China and America make most of the world's stuff, almost half of all of the world's stuff, American manufacturing doesn't actually employ a lot of people. In fact, if you look at America's workforce of around 140 million people, only around 10% of America's workforce actually works in manufacturing. Furthermore, if you look at American manufacturing and the jobs within American manufacturing, over half aren't actually on the job floor. In other words, they're in cubicles or they're working remotely. They're jobs that require college degrees. So the days of us cranking out more and more stuff and employing a lot of low-skilled manual labor on assembly lines, those are over. They need people majoring in supply chain management, or they need engineering majors, or they need people with trade skills that don't necessarily require a college degree, but require some education and specifically apprenticeship type of work. Okay, here's the most important part of the ISM Manufacturing Index and why it needs to be above 50 every month, moving forward every month, is yeah, it creates manufacturing jobs, but most of America's workforce works in the service sector. So literally 90% of all of Americans work in the service sector. What does that mean? They work for someone or do something that doesn't actually involve designing and building a product. Okay, they work in the service sector. They work for someone that provides a service and not a product. Okay, American manufacturing jobs not only are good paying jobs, but they create jobs for suppliers to those facilities. For example, if you open up a factory and it employs 1,000 people, what's implied by that is those 1,000 people in general probably have good paying jobs. But because you opened up that factory, there are going to be suppliers to that factory and suppliers to the supplier and so forth. So one job at a factory directly creates other jobs and other manufacturing jobs in the supply chain. But even with that, don't forget, only around 10% of America's workforce works directly in American manufacturing. 90% work in the service sector. There's a lot of data that says when you create one manufacturing job, you create 5, 10, 15, 20 jobs in the service sector, which is where most Americans work. So you can make the case that most Americans work in the service sector and their jobs are importantly tied to manufacturing jobs. In other words, if manufacturing and the ISM Manufacturing Index keeps shrinking, we crank out less and less stuff each month, in other words, it's under 50, then that means people lose their jobs in American manufacturing, right? That eventually will spill over into the service sector, which is where most Americans work, and then they'll start to lose their jobs, and that's when the bleeding really begins. So our government looks at this and tracks this to make sure that the trend line is positive and that it implies growth. So what are some of the things that have been happening? Okay, first of all, between 1991 and 2008, basically from one month to the next, and from one quarter to the next, and from one year to the next, the American economy kept growing and growing and growing and creating jobs and driving down unemployment while also keeping inflation in check. So we had a 17-year stretch of basically where the U.S. economy kept growing and growing and growing. And for the most part, during that time period, the ISM Manufacturing Index was above 50. I study this stuff, and it appears that the ISM Manufacturing Index is a precursor or a leading indicator of what's going to happen in the economy in the future. For example, the Great Recession hit us in 2008. Okay, so what do you think happened to the ISM Manufacturing Index in 2006, 2007, before the Great Recession actually hit us? Before 2008, and when the Great Recession actually started, the ISM Manufacturing Index was under 50 for 30-some months in a row. And our government said, wait a second, what's going to happen at some point if this continues? The recession happened. So literally, around 2006, every month in 2006, 2007, and 2008, the ISM Manufacturing Index was under 50. And then shortly thereafter, we hit the Great Recession. So again, it's a precursor of things to come. So that's why they look at it, is they want to look at it and say, hey, what's going to happen in a year or two by looking at the ISM Manufacturing Index? So what happened is we went through the Great Recession, and then the ISM Manufacturing Index started to be above 50. And it was above 50 in general every month for about 10 years. So 2010 to 2019, the ISM Manufacturing Index was above 50 for every month. And we went through a 10-year stretch. Basically, the U.S. economy grew 131 months in a row up until COVID hit. Excuse me. All right. In 2019, there were about 4 months of the ISM Manufacturing Index being under 50, but then it popped back up in January, February of 2020. So this is what some people are saying. First of all, the Great Recession ended in around 2010. Since 2010, our economy has grown every month since 2010. So that was 131 consecutive months. So you listen to the politicians and they say, I did this. First of all, if you look at those 131 months of consecutive economic growth, half of that was underneath the Obama administration and half of that was underneath the Trump administration. So you hear the politicians and they like to take a lot of the credit. I'm just pointing out that we had 131 consecutive months of economic growth that started back in 2010. Things started to slow down in 2019, but that was almost a 10-year stretch of no recessionary period. So a lot of people thought, you know, we might have been in a mild recession in late 2019, or because the ISM Manufacturing Index was under 50 towards the end of 2019, that there was a recession looming in 2020. But then things picked back up in January and February, and then bam, COVID hit. What do you think the ISM Manufacturing Index was in March, April, and May? It completely tanked, way under 50. Okay, so we have had, March, April, and May. Correct, 3 consecutive months of the ISM Manufacturing Index being under 50. And I'm talking it shrunk a lot. Here's the good news. The June ISM Manufacturing Index was above 50. Okay, so what that means is, in June, manufacturing output expanded and increased. We cranked out more stuff than the previous month. However, that previous month of May was awful. Okay, the ISM Manufacturing Index was way below 50. So the good news is things have picked up, but we need it to pick up each month moving forward, probably for several months, to create all of the jobs that have been lost because of COVID. All right. COVID-19, 1/3 of all of the job losses since March in the U.S. economy have been fully recovered and restored. So that's good. The good news is that if you look at the ISM Manufacturing Index, it was above 50 for June, so that's good. But 2/3 of the people that were displaced because of COVID are still unemployed, so that's not good. So we're going to watch the ISM Manufacturing Index, or the PMI, moving forward. If it continues to be above 50 every month, the next several months, that would imply that the worst is behind us. The concern is that in July it's above 50, in August it's above 50, in September it's above 50, so that's good. That's going to create jobs in manufacturing. Those will create jobs in the service sector, and then we'll get back to low unemployment. But if there's a second wave of COVID, then we might see, for example, the ISM Manufacturing Index falling below 50 from one month to the next, and then we have to dig ourselves out of that hole once again. So again, I hope you understand what this is. It comes out every month. The people that you work for look at this and pay attention to it, especially in the C-suites and the important people in our government that make policy decisions like interest rates and monetary policy. Do we raise it? Do we lower it? Fiscal policy like government spending. Do we lower taxes? That sort of thing. They have to look at all the data and decide, do we slow things down or do we try to pick things up? And the more information they have, the better. And from what I'm hearing, outside of GDP, unemployment, and inflation, that ISM Manufacturing Index is right up there and they pay close attention to it. So again, what you're majoring in is very important, and this economic indicator is directly related to the field that you're going into, because the government actually goes to your field to ask the questions and they say, measure this stuff for us, because we got to know what the numbers are. Okay, if you have any questions, let me know. I will post this and I will provide you my lecture notes in the written word just in case I talked through that too quickly, which I often do. Thank you.